of the City Council for Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023. And would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Blackwell?
Here.
Councilmember Ehlers? Councilmember Hinsey?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Lyons?
Here.
And Mayor Kranz.
Here.
Record will show that all members of the City Council are present.
Okay, if you'll rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. And there are no special presentations and proclamations tonight. So with that, Madam Clerk, if you'd please
Move to oral communications.
move on to oral communications.
All right, just a reminder, oral communications are for those items, to speak on items that are not listed on the agenda. First three speakers, Mark Wilcox, Rosetta Garcia, Terry Skelly.
Mark Wilcox, a father and grandfather and community volunteer. I was unable to attend the last week's City Council meeting where the City Council considered item 10C, the reintroduction of the City Council ordinance to establish a citywide ban on smoking in public places. I support the environmental protections this ban will bring from smoking and vaping debris that are deposited into the ground and make their way into the ocean. I came tonight also to show my full support of this comprehensive smoke-free outdoor area policy because it increases the protections from exposure to secondhand smoke for all of us. Even brief exposure to secondhand smoke and vape, whether tobacco or marijuana, has immediate adverse health consequences in adults and children. Our friends at the American Cancer Society tell us that smoking and vaping are still the leading causes of preventable cancer deaths. And importantly, smoke-free laws change social norms and provide additional support for those people who want to quit smoking. As this policy is implemented, perhaps this City Council should continue your excellent public health policy work and take an additional action to protect residents, especially families with children, from the exposure to secondhand smoke and vapor where they live. Residents who live in multi-unit residences generally share walls and ventilation where sleeping and drifting smoke can cause a host of health problems. As a grandfather who has children that live in rental properties, I respectfully suggest that you begin a study of smoke-free multi-family housing ordinances. Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights indicated that in January 2023, 77 cities in California have bans on smoking in multi-unit complexes. These ordinances are primarily in Central and Northern California. There are no ordinances yet in San Diego County cities. What if Encinitas were the first? In the meantime, I applaud your leadership in strong public health policies at last week's passage of this ordinance. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Kranz and Encinitas City Council. My name is Rosette Garcia. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of North County, San Diego. The League is a nonpartisan grassroots civic organization dedicated to encouraging informed and active participation by the public at all levels of government. The League has been around for over 100 years, providing impartial information to voters so they can make informed choices at the ballot box. Our own local league just celebrated its 60th birthday last year in 2022. I am here tonight to make a request of you. The League of Women Voters of North County, San Diego requests that you agendize our proposal for the City of Encinitas to sponsor candidate forums for City Council and mayoral races for each election cycle. As you probably know, every election cycle, individual voters and organizations ask us to moderate candidate forums because we are known to offer fair platforms with moderators trained to be fair and impartial. Some of you may have participated in one of our forums. Increasingly, we find that candidates are reluctant to participate in our forums, in any forum actually, due to concerns about hostile environments and uncivil behavior. We are very saddened by this situation. And we believe that voters deserve the opportunity to hear candidates respond to their questions. And candidates are entitled to a fair and civil platform where they can explore issues, showcase their knowledge, and present themselves to the voters who they want to vote for them. League-moderated candidate forums offer just that opportunity, and when they don't take place, voters and candidates alike are deprived. So we know that public agencies cannot spend taxpayer money on political activities, but you should know that we have successfully moderated candidate forums hosted by the City of Del Mar in collaboration with community organizations who cover any costs associated with the forums. We will do the same in Encinitas if you will provide the venue. We believe city-sponsored forums are the optimal solution to this situation because they will make the forums accessible to more voters. They will increase candidates' accountability to the voters who they wish to elect them. And they will give candidates equitable opportunity. And finally, we believe it will demonstrate the City Council's commitment to our shared values of public engagement in a fair, open, transparent, and civil manner. If I could just, I'd like to invite my league colleagues and anybody else in the audience to stand and just so that you know that I'm not here alone. Thank you.
Next speaker is Terry Skelly, followed by Gary Murphy, and then Mark Maville.
Good evening, City Council. I gave Kathy a flyer to distribute to each of you a little while ago. As a parent of young adult sons and a youth program director for San Diego Alliance, I have followed Measure H in the city, the unfolding of marijuana application procedures, and now the looming marijuana storefront openings. California State PTA has begun examining new legislation this year regarding marijuana that especially deals with youth protection measures. One important proposed legislation is AB 1207, authored by Assemblymember Irwin, entitled Cannabis Child Candy Protection Act. Proposition 64 stated that marijuana products would not be designed to be appealing to children. Unfortunately, regulations have weakened rather than enforced, and the pictures on that handout illustrate what I'm talking about. AB 1207 will clarify the regulations and definitions of what is considered attractive to children. The state failed to put into place systems to assess and prevent marijuana products from being attractive to children or to resemble conventional candy or food typically marketed to kids. At Rady's Children's Hospital here in San Diego, children under the age of 10 testing positive for THC has quadrupled since 2016, mostly from edibles, of which 3/4 were from candies or gummies. Half led to hospitalization and 1 in 10 to intensive care. The Cannabis Candy Child Protection Act will honor and promise the intent of Proposition 64 to keep cannabis and its products out of the hands and bodies of our kids. Perhaps the Encinitas City Council could review AB 1207 and consider sending a letter of support to Assemblymember Irwin. Thank you for your consideration and listening to my concerns about this very heartfelt subject.
Thank you. And if the city manager would, please maybe check. Thank you.
Gary Murphy, and followed by Mark Maville.
Hi, guys. Gary Murphy, 123 Wesley Cady Boulevard. Want to compliment the Public Works guys. Did a great job. They're doing pretty good, and I think they're The storms have been consistent through. But what I'm here for tonight is Encinitas drainage. Encinitas drainage is south of Union and down to Encinitas Boulevard. Tony knows about it. I've communicated with a couple of other council members. And I want to know why we haven't gotten it on the agenda. This is a picture of Orpheus Lake that used to be established back in 2002. It's not there no more because it's at Union Lake now. And I know the engineering department under Greg Shields, did a great job of building a channel and moving the lake closer and closer to Leucadia. It's not Leucadia's water. It's Encinitas' water. There's an abandoned pipe sitting underneath Leucadia Pizzeria that can take the water. And it's going to take about 4 times the amount of water that Leucadia has. But what this lake does is it goes through the channel, goes to Union. Then there's a sluice gate valve that in 2003 or 4, Rick Engineering, Dennis Bolin, said that that valve will not be open until downstream areas are dry. That's from Basil to Ponto. You guys are leaving it open. That's why Leucadia is flooding. Let's take that water south. So what I want to do is I'm here tonight to ask you to put it on the agenda so we can educate each other on what's going on and try to fix that water problem. And then that way you guys can keep going with your projects. And tonight I'm not here to talk about your pipe down there, that 60-inch pipe. Do what you may. But that's 3 years out. You guys say 2, I say 3. So what I'm saying is there are ways that we can do alterations, because this is what in 2003 at a meeting, the council asked for an engineer to come and enhance the nuisance drain. That is the system that's in Leucadia. It's a nuisance puddling drain. There are ways to fix it to where we don't have to do so much work with public work and the businesses can get rid of flooding this year. And then you guys can do your projects in due time. We got the Phoebe pump station. It's connected to that 24-inch pipe. So when Don Heiser, the fire chief, and I made the reservoir bigger, put a bigger pump in, we didn't know we were pushing pressurized water into that 24-inch pipe. It can be altered to its old pipe system, and it can take water away from Leucadia. These are inexpensive projects. I just wish you let us put it on the agenda to take care of interim projects in Leucadia and take care of Encinitas' drainage problem, because they're 2 different areas. Encinitas has a flooding problem, and they're moving it through Leucadia. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the time. Congratulations to the new council. Congratulations to your baby. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Mabel?
Mark Maville, I'm going to skirt over some quick topics here. I'm trying to get on the agenda the Portofino conversion. You've already discussed that. From what I understand, back when, did nothing about it for the homeless. Get them off the street, give them some pride. It'll put a dent in that. It is a dilemma, and they're coming in, and there's new ones every day. And, you know, you got to do something about it. You can't just sit there and not put it on the agenda. There's several things. I've been in here 5 or 6 times. Everything I've mentioned has never gotten on the agenda. You have your self-interest and your tax revenue type situations that are on there. But you're doing nothing about that. The cannabis huts is going to perpetuate a drug problem here. There will be fentanyl running through there. If you don't stop it now, I know it's a state thing, but you can even get an injunction and a sharp lawyer, and you can stop that. That's just going to perpetuate the problem. The underage drinking at the Cantina, home and away, he owns the other ones, and First Street Bar opened up on St. Patrick's Day, open till 3 a.m., and then they went down and shut it down. That guy's got to go. What's running through there is fentanyl distribution, prostitution, and underage drinking. You got to get it under control. I've got a friend that said, no cantinas in Encinitas, period. All it is, you know, all these kids have nothing better to do. Why don't you go read a book or something, you know? Or help your parents, or stay home, for God's sake. No more of this running these poor kids through, taking their fake IDs when they're 13 and selling them back to them. That's how bad it's gotten. And if you want to put your head in the sand, I don't know what to tell you. I should have ran for mayor, because none of this would be happening. We would have action, and we would have consistency, and things would be put on the docket for the people, not tax revenue, not that Sea Bluff thing down there. take care of the kids that are dying of fentanyl, and it will be perpetuated the way a lot of illegal activity happening behind doors, in the back. You got to install cameras and make sure these people that own those don't do that. But there's no reason to have it in the first place. Gummy bears, the lady just talked about it. How irresponsible is that? Are you not going to look at it, or are you going to take their tax revenue out of it? No. This whole thing has got to stop. You know, it's the people that you're up there for, right? Not money or a money grab or pulling. Where's the money go that you guys get on the funding and all that? Who knows? Salaries? I don't know. But this whole thing has got to stop. I mean, I've mentioned it before. Doesn't seem like you guys want to put it on the docket because it is something that is proactive. It would help the city. The city of Encinitas, the beach community here has been deemed the best beach city in the state. We want to keep it that way. The sheriff are doing the best they can, but you can't have one arm behind their back. They can go inside, undercover, and watch and monitor if they get the staffing.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it's not just a thank. Okay, we'll consider that. No, it's got to be action.
Mayor, that does conclude oral communications.
Okay, thank you very much. There was no closed session today, so there isn't a report. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes to the posted agenda. And then moving to the consent calendar, no items have been removed by the public.
I'll move to approve the consent
I'll
calendar.
second.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to item 10A, which is a public hearing to establish a permit parking zone on Via Molina, Via Tavira, Via Sarasan, Via Palacio, and Via Valina. And that will be presented by City Traffic Engineer Abe Vandigan. And I should add that this is a public hearing, which is what we didn't have last time. It's required, so quick rundown of the procedures. Staff will give a report. Council will then be asked to disclose information they have received that is not included in the staff report. There will be a round of preliminary questions of the council members, and then we will open the public hearing where speakers will be heard, and then we will close the public hearing, and the council will then discuss and take whatever actions decided upon.
Good evening, Mayor Kranz, council members, members of the public. We're back pretty quickly. We were here about 2 weeks ago, I think, for the permit parking zone program. So the presentation tonight, I didn't really bring in most of the slides that we had last time. Brief summary of what happened. Everybody knows pretty much. There is a paragraph added about what happened earlier this month. The process, the evaluation, staff recommendation, the discussions at our council meeting earlier this March, and the direction from the city council to implement the program. The photo on the right shows the area that the program will be implemented based on the direction from council, starting from the edge of the business area on Via Molina all the way to Via Cantabria. We've already prepared plans to add the proper signage to notify the residents and whoever is going to be there during the night to know that there will be parking permit required from 10 to 8, that the plan is ready. We haven't ordered the sign pending tonight's approval. The process, the implementation process was included in the report, the resolution that is being adopted tonight, if adopted obviously by council. The area 200 feet east of Via Tavira on Via Molina all the way to Via Cantabria, and the other 4 streets in the permit parking area zone. A permit parking area, that would be our zone, Zone D. Haven't yet ordered the parking permits, but I think they will be purple, again, pending tonight's approval. No stopping and standing between 10 to 8 every day, except with the exception of the ones that have a permit or are otherwise exempt based on California Vehicle Code. Our ongoing practice has been that each resident would get a resident permit for their vehicle, no matter how many vehicles they own, based on their registration and their insurance information. And each property, each dwelling unit, will get a maximum of 3 guest passes that are unnamed and not connected or tied to a vehicle registration. There was a minor edit to the resolution. I'm not sure if all council members have seen the amended reso that is placed on the dais up there. We have added the clarification that these 3 visitor permits are not per resident, but per dwelling unit, to clarify that if there are like 5 residents there that are on the lease or have vehicles, not each one of them would get three guest passes or visitor passes. Our fee that I think a couple of years ago was, this fee hasn't been changed, has always been $5 for a permit. We anticipate, we are working with a few different printing companies to see how soon we can get the parking permits. If we get them by early April, which is the tentative date, we're planning on sending out letters to notify everybody that this program was adopted by council, so that they would have the full month of April, or most of the month of April, to come to the city hall and use our different channels. We're checking to see if we can create an online application process for people not to have to come to the city hall, either through email or through our InterGov system, to be able to upload their documents, to be able to pull their permits. But we will make sure everybody in the community, in the parking permit area, will be notified that they will use the month of April. And our tentative start date for the implementation of the program is May 1st, assuming all the signs will go in and the sheriff's notified and everything is in place by then. That's our tentative schedule. Again, everything based on the assumption that council wants to adopt this. With that, I appreciate your attention and I'm open to questions.
I think, given the action we took at the last meeting, it's a pretty safe assumption, but who knows? So let's begin with disclosures.
Nothing to disclose.
I had phone conversations with Bonnie Bobison and Sandra Anderson. I don't think any new information came across in those discussions over the last, day or so.
I have nothing to disclose.
I have nothing new to disclose, but the same would be true that from the last time, and that is that I have met with the neighbors and I have met with the property manager for the resort in the past.
Nothing to disclose. Okay, are there any
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor Lyons?
Yes, Abe, could you clarify, and you probably have done this in the past, but I apologize for not knowing. We have a fee of $5. Is that a one-time fee or is that an annual fee?
Currently, our program does not have an expiration in the other zones. And basically, we assume that the residents who are residing at that property would get a permit and will utilize it. When they leave, we have requested in the past that they mail their permits to us, so the new resident would come in and get a new permit. How much it has been effective, I cannot really say. But our existing zones do not have an expiration. For this specific program, the fact that council direction was for a 1-year implementation, and we're supposed to come back and report for 1 year, and the fact that we have this apartment complex that there might be a little bit more turnover there, to make sure we're capturing, all the data that council needs potentially for the next year, to see how many turnovers we had, how many parking passes were issued, how many guest passes were issued, because I anticipate these would be the information that council would like next year. So I'm planning on this, I guess, preliminary round or whatever pilot round we want to call it, to keep a 1-year expiration on it, to be able to kind of monitor the program better. If that's the case, next year we can decide if we want to recharge, if we want to continue the program another $5. But basically, for every permit, we charge $5. If we have to reissue, we'll do another $5. But again, the existing programs, it's a one-time thing because they don't expire. Was it clear or?
Yeah, that's clear. I'm glad I asked the question because I didn't understand that before. Okay, well, thank you.
Councilmember Ehlers.
Let's see, I've had several questions. I'll start with the one that just came to mind. I didn't see the expiration explained in the staff report. Did I miss it?
I am not sure if it was there.
Okay, but our current, my presumption when we passed this last time and today was that it didn't expire like the old one. So that would be a new nuance, I think, that we may discuss. So this is clarification. So second question I have is probably directed more to the city attorney, and I just want to understand, I think the explanation I got is that we have as I like to call it, a new sheriff in town. And so if you could just enlighten us, I think when we passed this last time, we talked about it, we directed it to come back on consent calendar. And I understand if you feel the need to bring it here. I just would like the public and myself to understand why.
Thank you, Councilmember Ehlers. The reason we're bringing it back is that the municipal code actually requires us to have a public hearing and an adopted resolution prior to granting the permit parking program. So that's why we were not able to bring it back on consent, because we're required to have a public hearing prior to adopting the permit parking zone.
Okay, but in the past, I think past sheriffs looked at the same situation and said a consent calendar was the same. You're just interpreting it differently, which that's your prerogative.
Correct. I read it as a public hearing. Being an open public hearing has to be noticed. The public has to be given an opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, one more. On the, back to staff, on the resolution that we're hopefully adopting tonight, I looked at the last one that we adopted in 2019, and it's modeled very similarly, of course. The one difference I noticed was on the description for the resort at Encinitas. It uses I'll call it the proper name of the resort, which we know changed 3 years ago. If I go back and look at the Seacrest equivalent, it says the Essex Apartments located at, and it gives the street name. And so when I look at the current form of the resolution and I look at the verification process using vehicle registration and vehicle insurance documentation, my presumption is that that would refer to the street address, and nowhere on that would it say resort at resort luxury apartment home. So would staff either explain why we don't need the located on and the street address? I would think I would propose another amendment that would add the street address requirement or add to the luxury apartment description located at street address, like the previously approved resolution.
Certainly, we'd be open to that. I think that's a good modification, a good amendment.
Okay, thank you. That's good.
Okay, with that, we will open the public hearing.
Okay, our first three speakers, we have Bonnie Bobzian with a time donation from David and Karen Stegman. David and Karen are here, followed by Sandra Anderson, Wendy Shalou, and then Mark Maville.
My name is Bonnie Bobzine. I reside at 273 Via Palacio. Before this final vote occurs, I want to remind the audience of our problems and the necessity for permit parking should anyone tonight raise objections or questions. We hope any equivocation will be addressed by this summary. Tonight I will summarize our neighborhood struggles and our pursuit for relief. Our quest for permit parking began in June 2021 when we first met with the resort apartment management to discuss the overflow of vehicles from their complex onto the four streets via Palacio, via Saracen, via Tavira, and via Valina. We shared with management that since the change in complex ownership in April 2021, the overflow of vehicles began. The overflow was accompanied by numerous behaviors by the vehicle occupants that changed the character of our neighborhood, which compromised public safety, public health, and quality of life. We explained that the over-occupancy of the complex and the inefficient use of their parking capacity were the primary causes of the changes in our neighborhood. The resort regional management responded, quote, "We cannot legally monitor or discipline existing tenants or their guests for actions performed outside of the community and outside of our lease jurisdiction," end quote. The problems we have continued to experience include vandalism. First slide shows relentless trash. Next slide, please. Because of beer bottles, beer cans. Could you move this? Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you. Beer cans, food containers, drug paraphernalia, defecation and urination on our green belts. Next slide. Okay. Thank you. Used condoms and wipes tossed into our streets. Next slide. Vomit on the street, loud music and conversation at late hours, verbal harassment of young women. The 4 streets are used as a commuter and commercial center. Next slide, please. Thank you. We see here a sequence of 3 photos demonstrating commuter activity. In the first photo, we see a car at 7:03 a.m. Next slide, please. They're out of order. Can you go back 2, please? Thank you. This is where they are at 7:01 a.m. They're parked next to each other. People move from one vehicle to the next. Next slide, please. The vehicle drives off, and next slide, please. And then the other vehicle stays on our street throughout the entire day. Next slide, please. And this is a demonstration of the numerous commercial vehicles on our street. They have commercial logos and are carrying a variety of goods. Next slide, please. Vehicle repairs occur frequently, such as spray painting vehicles, engine repairs, and oil changes. Trash cans cannot be accessed by garbage trucks because non-resident vehicles are parked too close to the trash containers. Trash cans are removed from the street and placed on sidewalks or driveways to allow non-resident vehicles to park at that spot. Residents don't have parking spaces for their own guests due to the influx of non-resident vehicles. Vehicle alarms and locks go off at all times of the night. Residents no longer feel safe walking our neighborhood alone, especially at night. They no longer feel safe leaving their homes when a stranger is parked in front of their residence for hours. They do not feel safe reporting incidents to the sheriff because of retaliation that has occurred. We are not the only ones who have witnessed a change in our neighborhood. Resort tenants have shared their observations with us in person and in Yelp reviews. They reported a significant change in the resort complex after property ownership changed. They documented the negative behaviors I have just shared with you and noted the decline in safety in our neighborhood. The foregoing problems should not be accepted as the new normal for any neighborhood. Initially, resort management tried to help resolve the parking situation. The management did place a notice in their monthly email to their tenants requesting them to use on-site parking. The management gave us flyers to put on the windshields of the non-residents parked on our 4 streets, requesting them to use resort parking. Neither of these actions helped. The management stated their parking lots would be restriped to accommodate more vehicles. This has yet to occur. Despite countless meetings and communications with the resort management, no further substantive actions have been taken. Lacking any other viable solution, we sought permit parking for our 4 streets. In November 2021, the MTS Commission approved our request for permit parking by 6-1. Over the next 15 months, the following happened. Next slide, please. Multiple times we tallied parking at 5 a.m. and found 80 to 100 empty parking spots in the resort private lots, while 80 non-resident vehicles parked on our 4 streets. Additionally, there are 2 private streets had 30 to 40 empty spots. Deputy Mayor Joy Lines communicated with the resort management to resolve our problems. We contacted the fire marshal regarding apartment over-occupancy. He stated he had no jurisdiction over this issue. We sought legal advice and were told there is no enforcement mechanism for apartment over-occupancy. Commander Lopez, Captain Lawrence, Deputy Combo, and Sergeant Bruton met with us at various times to organize and deploy sheriff resources to our 4 streets to curb the numerous municipal code violations, such as vehicles blocking fire hydrants in driveways, loitering in vehicles for hours drinking alcohol, and vehicles parked continuously for longer than 72 hours. Commander Lopez stated in September 2022 that he felt the sheriff office is not the answer to our problems. He is right. Sheriff patrols through our neighborhood were increased. Our neighbors reported infractions to the sheriff. However, for many of the municipal code violations, the offender was often gone by the time the sheriff officer arrived on our streets. When the community officer combo and fire marshal attempted to meet with the management in October 2022, they received a letter stating the management no longer wished any contact regarding our problems. Despite all these efforts, our problems were never resolved. We had exhausted all other means to restore the public safety and public health of our neighborhood. Therefore, we continued to pursue permit parking. Municipal Code 14.41.030 and Attorney General Opinion 14-304 state the criteria we must fulfill to qualify for permit parking. There was controversy with the city staff on the interpretation of many of the terms and requirements in this municipal code. Because of this controversy, city staff opposed granting us permit parking. We proved we were fully compliant with this municipal code based on the code's interpretation when previous Encinitas neighborhoods were granted permit parking. Additionally, we used the code's terms correctly based on how other California cities use the terms. There have been 3 resolutions in Encinitas passed granting permit parking. Throughout the code's entire legislative history, the city councils and engineering departments were consistent with the code's purpose as well as usage of terms. We showed how our problems are identical to preceding Encinitas neighborhoods granted permit parking and how it worked. From a traffic engineering report from 2019 concerning the Essex Heights apartment permit zone, the traffic engineer reported, quote, "Previous resident concerns of illegal activity on the street have subsided since the implementation of the permit parking programs, and no further concerns have been brought forward to staff." End quote. Permit parking works. Sympathy is not enough. We need solutions. We appreciate your unanimous vote on February 22nd, 2023, establishing permit parking from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. for Via Molina, Via Palacio, Via Saracen, Via Volina, and Via Tafira. Thank you.
Sandra Anderson, followed by Wendy Shalou, and then Mark Maville.
I'm very glad we've gotten this far with resolution number 2023-22. And there, after reviewing it and the website and the other resolutions, there's just a couple parts of the resolution that we have some concerns with, and that's what I'm going to be addressing right now. So this slide that's up right now is the current resolution, or the second version of the resolution, and it only pertains to section C in there. And I'm just going to read it so that we're all clear on what it currently says, and then the modifications that we believe need to be added to paragraph C. So right now it says, each resident of a dwelling unit within the parking zone on Via Tavera, Via Saracen, Via Palacio, Via Volina, and the resort at Encinitas luxury apartment homes can receive one resident permit for each vehicle owned or leased by the resident as shown on the vehicle's registration or insurance documentation, and a maximum of 3 visitor permits. Okay, the next slide, if you can go to the, so the next slide shows, this is actually what is on the Encinitas website right now. I copied it exactly from there, and nowhere on here does it talk about insurance agreement as any way to prove residency to get a permit parking, okay? So I just wanted to point this out because this is one place that I went to, and I also went to the other 3 resolutions. Can you go to the next slide, please? So after doing some research, this is a summary of the omissions and the misstatements that are in the proposed resolution, okay? And once again, I'm only referring to section C in the resolution, okay? So we need to add qualifying address, and on the next slide, I'll show you the exact changes highlighted and striked out. We need to admit this insurance documentation, because nowhere is that mentioned in the code or on the website that that's a way to prove residency. We need to add per address, which I think Abe mentioned earlier, because the guest permits are allocated per address, not per resident, and I think that needs to be clarified. And then the next thing is to add a line that says, for additional requirements to qualify for permit parking, see the City of Encinitas website. And the reason we believe this needs to be added is because there's more restrictions or more requirements to get a permit parking pass than is in the resolution. So that's why we believe that line needs to be added. So the next slide. So the last slide is the recommended revisions that we believe need to be in here. We need to add from a qualifying address, strike out insurance documentation, add per address, and add that last line. And we did talk to Abe about that today, and I think he's in agreement with those changes. We did have a conversation with Abe about that. And the only other thing I just wanted to let you all know, in case you don't know, we all received a letter in the mail from Abe and the City of Encinitas regarding this permit parking. So just so you're aware, we all got a letter in the neighborhood. Thank you.
May I just ask a quick question about that letter? It's for Abe, I think. Was that letter in English and in Spanish?
No, it was only in English.
Okay. I'm curious to know perhaps if there's anybody in the audience who would have preferred tonight's meeting to be translated in Spanish. I'm seeing some head nods. So I'm concerned that we move forward with a decision tonight and that we don't have, one, the letter that has been translated into Spanish, and secondly, translation services here for those in the audience who would prefer to hear this in Spanish.
Noted. So are there any more speakers?
Yes. Wendy Shalhoub, followed by Mark Maville.
Council members and Mayor Krantz, I just want to thank you all for supporting us in this endeavor and giving us this safety measure and allowing to move forward with this. I just want to talk about the Yelp reviews. Someone brought this to my attention, and Kelly, this apartment complex is in your district. The problems are much more severe than you can imagine. And first of all, 6 people tenants spoke about the over-occupancy problems going on there, in addition to cockroaches, inaccessible management, and on and on. It was really quite enlightening. And the reviews have just decreased terribly from 2 years ago under the previous management to where they are now. So I just wanted to let you all know that as Encinitas is continuing to develop and expand, and I hope you will consider the amendments as we put forth. Thank you.
May I make a request that you screenshot those Yelp reviews and send them to us, because we do have a responsibility to do some monitoring of affordable housing in our city. We have contracts in order to do that. And so I think it's important that we're taking a look at those concerns.
Happy to. In fact, I highlighted all the over-occupancy. I sent a copy to Bruce. Happy to share that with everyone.
Mark Maville?
I'm not as passionate about this topic, I guess if you want to call it that. I have no dog in the fight, but I have lived in neighborhoods where things became a grassroots effort. I think you're doing a great job. You're doing a great thing. What happened to the 25% and 95% requirement? I guess you guys just absolved that and let it go ahead. As far as even having gate the community, everybody pitch in, have the gate put in, code. You can't get in unless you have a code. That would cut it back severely. This happens down at Moonlight and everywhere through the city. There's stuff thrown on the ground and vomit and all that. This just happens to be a little more isolated, and they're taking advantage of it. I'm a vendor, or I own a company, Executive Detail. We do go on site, and we have to make sure environmentally we're safe and nothing's running. But you can't run those people off. Those vehicles that were there, the landscaping, were doing work in your neighborhood for somebody else, and probably out of convenience, left the truck so they could access the tools a little later on in the day. Not trying to violate anything. If you got a garage, 3-car garage, I had one over in Scripps, empty the garage, put your cars in there, then you take the cars off the street. Then you have the driveways behind it, and you lessen that. If you've got people coming over on Thanksgiving, Christmas, you're doing the same thing. You're taking up spaces that are designed for the residents. And it's just, the signage is a great idea. Do the permits have the name of the street on each permit, so you know which street it's supposed to be attached to, or is it just a vanilla type deal and you can do whatever you want and park wherever you want? I mean, it is gonna happen. It does, like at our beaches, the abuse is there. Once I transition all the way in, I'm probably gonna be up against it, but in our neighborhoods that I was dealing with, we monitored grassroots. It's like the theft, signs where everybody's watching, keeping an eye on it. And then when it does come to a situation where you have to have the sheriff out there, they'll take the time, check, see if the car's stolen. Is your registration updated? What are you doing here? What's your purpose? If it's just to hang out, you're out, and that's it. But the way you guys are handling it is very good, and if you've enveloped all those streets, that's a good thing. That's positive. So I don't know. I just think that if you threatened at night and you got your garage doors open, close them. If you get the trash cans are being moved around, no big deal. Just move them. I mean, you're going to have to take something on the chin for it. But with that situation, the trash and everything, no, that's not acceptable. And so if you can run that off, gate the communities at the front of the cul-de-sac, pitch in, you'll all have a gate code. There you go. The resolution is there. It just, it'd be a little expensive at first, but it has to be approved by the city, permitted, and all that. So no dog in the fight, but I think you guys are doing a great job on this part. So.
That concludes public speakers on this item.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we will close the public hearing and begin deliberations. Deputy Mayor Lyons.
Thank you, Mayor Kranz. I have a couple questions for staff. I support this as I did when it came before us, so I want to start by saying that. But I do want to ask before I make a statement about it was there a reason the insurance documentation was added? I feel as though the vehicle registration is sufficient. But was there a reason the insurance documentation was added as a way to determine residency?
Well, our practice the past few years, I've been with the city, was pretty much always based on our trust to our residents. There has been cases, not very many. I mean, I can't really give a percentage. I would say less than 5%, not very many. But situations where, for various reasons, the car is not in the name of the resident. Parent can buy a car for their kid, it's in their business name, or is in their, there are various reasons where car registration is not necessarily to their name, but that's the car they drive. In these cases, a lot of these cases, they buy the insurance themselves, so that's another way of verifying if they actually drive that car. But again, we can always, force the resident or ask them to go to DMV, find a way to change the title or change the address on the title. But this is basically a second way of, in cases where we had issues with verification, to help our residents to be able to give them the permit.
It adds a level of complexity that maybe we don't need to add. So that's where I'm kind of leaning in my thoughts on it.
Well, the first approach is always the registration. Like, we don't tell them to bring both. If a resident comes in and says, hey, like, this is a car, like, my dad owns it, I drive it, I pay for the insurance. So in that case, they cannot really give us a registration for that car because it's their dad's car.
I understand.
That's
how's our wording for our other parking permit areas? I would like to keep this as consistent with other areas as possible.
This is what we're doing everywhere. This is not unique to this program. This is how we implement all of our parking permit programs.
Okay. One of the things I have two more comments. One's a question. One of the things I'm realizing I should have asked before is, what does our permit look like? You've said that we give a permit and it's it's a one-time permit. Is it something that hangs in a car, or is it like something that sticks on a
Yeah, the
window?
resident one is a sticker. The guest one is a hanger.
Right, okay, that makes sense.
But they both have the same collar. For each zone, there is a collar.
Okay. One of the things I think I may be leaning towards, and I'll see what my colleagues think, is any communication that we put out, and maybe we need to reissue the communication we've already put out, should also be in Spanish language. It's a good policy for us, so I just wanted to make that statement.
This letter that was sent out was just a notification for this public hearing tonight. The second one that we'll send out, if the resolution gets adopted tonight, the program is going to be implemented, we'll make sure that the second one is sent when it's sent to the residents to notify them of how they have to approach the city to get these permits. We'll make sure it's both in English and Spanish. Again, if this goes through tonight.
Yeah, I too will be supporting this, but I do want to first address the Spanish. I think we had at least one audience member, maybe several, that would have preferred to have somebody to translate tonight, and I support that. And so if we had to, I would be supportive of bringing this back one more time. I know it's painful, but I want to do it the right way. And Councilmember Lyons, I totally agree with your comment that I want this to be consistent both in form and permitting to the existing process today. So, you know, I won't make a motion yet. I think we're still in discussion, but things I would like to see are, we already talked about the road, the street name for the Encinitas luxury apartments. I totally agree with adding the words per residence so that it's 3 visitors passes or permits per resident. I don't want to put an expiration on this one where no other of our zones have an expiration. My presumption was when we approved it last time there was no expiration, so I'd like to explicitly put that in the resolution. And then I would consider, and I apologize for putting you and us through this again, having a Spanish translator here, reissuing the letter in Spanish. So I would ask, what changed? Why, and this is to staff, why did we have a public hearing previously, but no similar letter was sent out then? But when we continued it to what was going to be the consent calendar, there was suddenly a need to send out a notification letter. What happened?
This, for the past 5 years that I myself and Jill, a little less than me, have been here with the city, this is the first permit parking zone that we're establishing. So I cannot say how the previous traffic team, city engineer, or the city attorney at that point interpreted our muni code. But as our city attorney mentioned, the language of the municipal code is pretty clear. It says following a public hearing. Now, if a public hearing can be done with a consent item, I'll defer to our city attorney to.
Okay, so so the fact that the letter came out on the second iteration is tied to the new interpretation of the consent calendar.
I'm not sure if I'm
methodology
following.
under our new city attorney.
I think I can answer that. The last meeting was not noticed as a public hearing, letter or otherwise, and
Okay.
that this one was a notice public hearing, which is hence the reason why the notices went out.
Unless you want a motion.
Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you, and I thank Joy and I thank Bruce for supporting those comments tonight. And I think it is important that we reissue the notice in Spanish, that we provide time to take input on what it is we're considering tonight in Spanish, and let there be an avenue to incorporate any feedback from residents of the resort who might be Spanish speakers as part of that process. And that the night that this is re-agendized, that we are providing a translator to give real-time, let folks give real-time comment as well. And I'll say it in Spanish to the best of my ability too. Gracias por estar aquí esta noche. Vamos a rehacer esa esa cosa para que ustedes puedan involucrar y tenemos una traductora que estará aquí en la noche que oímos otra vez esa cosa y también vamos a hacer de nuevo la noticia para enviar a todos en inglés, en español y si hayan otros idiomas que debemos considerar también, queremos saber lo que son. Gracias. Oh, and I'm not done with my comments. I think it's important because this is the first program that we are doing with our current staff that we have really clear objectives for effectiveness because when this returned to us in a year, we might have other requests. So I do support what residents are asking for tonight, especially because it considers residents of the resort. But I think what we need to do is we need to say, when we hear this again, here's what we consider an effective program. We've limited the calls for service that we've needed to have in this zone. We've heard from the residents that they're happy with how the program is going. I'm sure there are other things that are beyond what I'm able to come up with tonight that you would suggest using for effectiveness. And I hope that those metrics are part of the resolution that will come before us when we have our next public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Blackwell.
Yes, I appreciate all the comments that my fellow council members have made. I just wanted to ask Bruce for one clarification on his comment. When you talked about the visitor or guest permits, was it per address you were asking for or per resident?
Good question. Per address. I said
Okay, you
residence.
did- okay,
But
yes.
I now understand resident, and residence sounds very similar.
Yeah,
So
I just wanted to-
Per address might be per apartment, per house, per domicile.
Yes, perfect. Okay, that clarifies it for me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Are you back up, Councilmember?
If you
Ayers?
want a motion.
Yeah, that you can make the motion.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we continue this date certain. What would the date be? The first meeting in April?
12th.
April 12th, to bring it back as a public noticed meeting. And with the following changes to the resolution, that we'd clarify the street addresses or street on which Encinitas luxury apartment homes reside, that we would add the term as was suggested by Bonnie, per residence, not TS, but CE, that we would explicitly say that, like the others, this has no expiration. And I would leave it to staff whether we needed to put on there the 4 additional requirements to qualify for permit parking, see Encinitas website. I don't think we'd done that previously, and so I'll take that out of the motion. We can debate it during the public meeting if it's that important. So that's the changes, and then renoticing the letter in Spanish and in English to the same, all the affected addresses as you did before, and having an interpreter here for that night so that everyone's comfortable coming up and speaking to us, whether it's in Spanish or English, and then we can get it translated. So, and we actually welcome you to come up and comment, everyone. It's for everybody.
Yeah, one friendly amendment, if you'll consider it, is that we might have some other languages besides Spanish that are needed for the notice. And so what I'm asking the folks here tonight is to let us know if there's another language so that we can write that notice in an additional language.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And that information should go to the city manager or to the traffic engineer if there are additional languages that we need to cover.
Yeah, we'll direct it to the city manager, and then she can figure out where to go from there.
Okay.
And
I'll accept the amendment.
I will second the motion and say that it's unfortunate that I didn't think of the interpreter need in this particular case. I think that as a council, we probably need to have a conversation about this particular service, because to me, it seems a little odd to be making a decision agenda item by agenda item, which need interpretation and which need dual language notice and those sort of things. Sandag long ago committed to an equity DEI program that has a standing interpretation that goes with each of their meetings, and I have no idea what that would cost. But you know, otherwise, how are we going to decide which items need an interpreter? It just seems kind of a bit of a challenge to address each item that way.
We do have an item that is coming forward to you on an upcoming agenda with that very issue and cost. Yes.
Okay, very good. Quite timely. Thank you.
I'll withdraw my request to speak.
You withdraw it? Okay.
Yep.
There it goes. With that, we'll vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you, and I apologize for the delay. This government is kind of complicated sometimes, I guess.
Okay.
All right, on to the next item, which is 10B, and that is the electric vehicle charging station master plan. And our presenter on that item is Sustainability Manager Nahara. And it looks like the Development Services Director is also with you.
Thank you, Council. And we also have on the line Mike Usen. He is our project manager from DKS Associates. That was the consultant on the project. Mike, can you just make sure that you're on, please?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. So Mike is joining us remotely because his consulting firm is based in Washington State, and we wanted to save some greenhouse gas emissions, so he's joining remotely. So again, this is item 10B, and the recommendation tonight is to approve the EV charging station master plan. And I will quickly turn it over to Mike Usen to give you the presentation tonight.
All right, well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here virtually and save some greenhouse gas emissions, and also thank you for the opportunity to work with your community on developing this plan. So why are we doing this? We are doing this to implement Climate Action Goal 4.3 to increase the use of alternative fuels, and as you, I'm sure, are aware, the majority of light-duty vehicles are electrifying. That is the dominant fuel for the future of the light-duty vehicles, which is what the focus of this plan is. And this graph on the right-hand side of the image shows the current data on electric vehicle registrations in the state of California. As you can see, over the last 2 years, there's been a huge jump. If we were to look at the same graph 3 years from now, it's going to be significantly greater. And so what we are trying to do in this plan is accommodate and facilitate this transition to electric vehicles. Next slide. So these are the objectives that were outlined in the city's scope of work, and hopefully we've achieved them. I'm not going to read them, but as you can see, the whole theme here is to really kind of figure out how to address the needs of vehicle electrification within the city of Encinitas by providing sufficient charging infrastructure. Next slide. So before I get into sort of what our recommendations are and how we got to where we got, I just want to provide a very, very brief course on electric vehicle charging, because these are the types of chargers that this plan recommends. The first is level 2 charging, and these are 220 to 240 volt chargers that are used primarily for residential applications, for commercial applications where you're going to be parked for a long time, for workplace and that kind of thing. And those are, there's a very strong need for those, as well as shown on the next slide, are DC fast chargers. So DC fast chargers are much more, much quicker, and there's a big range in speed between, really between 25 kilowatts and 350 kilowatts. So there's a very large change, but in general, they charge at least 50 to 60 miles of range per hour of charge, and the newer technologies, the higher power chargers, even faster. On the upper part of the image are 3 different plug designs. Different vehicles have different plug designs, although it's becoming increasingly standardized between the CCS Combo and Tesla. And even Tesla chargers are now becoming more usable by other users. Let's go to the next slide. So, where are chargers today? This screen capture from PlugShare shows locations throughout the city of Encinitas, mostly on the the west side of the city, and in areas where there's commercial, which makes more sense for both level 2 and DC fast chargers. And then the chart explains both where they are located, as well as who the charging network is, primarily EVgo, ChargePoint, and Blink, and then the distribution by type. So right now there's only 14 level 2 chargers and 15 DC fast chargers. Obviously that's far insufficient for the future needs, which are captured on the next slide. So what we did was we took a look at the state's projections for the county, and then extrapolated that down at the city level, and then looking at both level 2 and DC fast chargers, as well as 2 horizon years, 2025 and 2030, developed some projections as to what future needs are going to be, so that we can figure out how to distribute those geographically throughout the city. And as you can see, the majority of future electric vehicles are going to be battery electric rather than plug-in electric. So that's why it's really important that we provide these chargers. Next slide. So one of the things that we did as part of this project was reach out to the community. And we did this in a number of different venues, including the farmers market. We had an online workshop back in June, and then we had an online web page that this is a screen capture of on the right, to solicit input. And we got input on different types of chargers, and those are shown by the different colors, both level 2 and DC fast chargers, and asked for comments as well. We received 131 comments, which is probably a record for a project of this size. I was very impressed with how engaged this community was on giving us input, and we used that input to inform the rest of the plan, which are shown on the next slide. So what we did was we focused on sort of the key activity areas, which are these areas that are outlined on the map in these dotted outlines. And then we applied various siting criteria. So for different types of chargers, and I talked about that earlier, the level 2 and the DC fast chargers, these were the types of siting criteria that we applied based on the public input to different geographic areas throughout the city, as shown on the next slide. So what we wanted to do was make sure that there was adequate, equitable distribution so that all residents and employees could have access convenient to where they live and work throughout the city, and I should add visitors as well. And again, what we did was we looked at 2 horizon years, 2025 and 2030, to achieve some kind of an equitable distribution throughout the city. And on the next slide, it breaks down where these are located at city-owned facilities, because the city has direct control over its own real estate assets. It doesn't necessarily have direct control. It may have indirect control through the building code, and I'll talk about that at the end. But these were basically where we wanted to distribute chargers. And as you can see, again, both level 2 and DC fast chargers for 2025 and 2030. As you can see, there's significant growth for both types. And what we try to do is distribute them so that, especially in the early years, before EV adoption is as great as it will be in the future, we don't essentially add chargers to too many parking stalls in public parks and beaches initially, but over time, as EV adoption increases, we want to make sure there's sufficient charging capacity to meet the needs of EV drivers at these locations. Next slide. So the city is already addressing this, and this is the Encinitas Municipal Code, Chapter 23. The Green Building Code has a number of different provisions that if you're familiar with, it's really important. The city is mandating, and so what we're doing in the plan is making some recommendations, but this is a regulation. So EV ready means basically providing the electrical infrastructure to facilitate future installation of chargers at single family and 2-family dwellings. And then for different multifamily, at least 15% of the spaces have to have EV charging stations, and these are level 2 charging stations. And then for the non-residential, at least I think it's 6%. It's hard for me to read the slide. Crystal, did I read that correctly?
8%.
8%. I broke my glasses over the weekend, so I can't read as well as I used to. And that's 8% for additions for modifications. So when there's modifications or new construction within existing facilities, those facilities have to have a significant number of chargers as well. Next slide. So in addition to some of the geographic recommendations for both level 2 and DC fast chargers that we've shown in the earlier slides, we also came up with a number of what I would call strategic recommendations. And these are included in both the executive summary of the plan as well as in the conclusion. But these are basic recommendations that really apply citywide and sort of provide some general guidance, hopefully the kind of guidance that will help implement the plan going forward as the city tries to meet the needs over the next 10 years. Again, this was a 10-year plan, and so I would encourage the city to track opportunities that come forward. Right now, the state of California, and indeed throughout the United States, there's a lot of federal funding, there's a lot of state funding for charging opportunities, local utilities also have programs that can be taken advantage of. And so these are the kind of recommendations. And each of these there's quite a bit more detail in the document itself. But I would encourage the city council and the citizens to become familiar with this information. And I think that's the second to last slide. So why don't we go to the agenda item? So Crystal, I think this is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And this pretty much wraps up the presentation. And I'll just remind you that the recommended action tonight is to approve the EV charging station master plan.
Okay, thank you. And I know there are some car dealers that have some chargers that didn't seem to make the list, and Tesla is going to be taking over the BMW site as well. So were those factored into this plan at all?
So this list included only publicly available charging stations. So the ones at the dealers, my understanding, are only available for owners of those particular vehicles, whereas what we're highlighting is charging stations that are available to everyone in this plan.
Thank you. Councilmember Ehlers.
Yeah, some questions of clarification. I think the total demand, the gap analysis you're looking at was for the total gap. In other words, I would divide that gap into how we fill it as publicly owned, publicly provided charging stations, publicly owned land, privately partnered provided charging stations like EVgo down here, and then privately owned, privately. Can you give us a breakdown of that gap and how you anticipate or how much you think we're going to be paying for the public portion? How many units?
So one of the tables should show, so we didn't go into that level of detail in the presentation, I apologize, but in the plan there are, within those individual sub-sites, we do call out all of the publicly located, so the ones on public facilities, and then the ones that would be responsible to be implemented voluntarily on the commercial sites. So those numbers are in there. We just didn't go over them specifically in the presentation.
Are they actually in there? You said the publicly, but I think there's two classes of public. One, which is a partnership on public land, much like the B-cycle bicycles are on potentially leased land or EVgo.
Yeah.
And then there are the ones that like on Moonlight Beach, let's say we don't get a partner and we go own and manage the facility.
Yeah.
Did you break it down that way?
No, I don't know if I necessarily would, because I think that the city would almost always partner with a EV charger company that can serve that service. We don't have that technology in-house, so I think that there are just those two types that you described.
Okay, great.
So, yeah.
The cost, I think on page 39, I thought there was a very telling statement. The higher capital, and I'm quoting, the higher capital and operations cost are passed on to users. This is talking about the DC, the high wattage, kilowattage chargers. The higher operating costs are passed on to users in terms of higher per kilowatt-hour charging costs in exchange for the convenience of much quicker charging speeds. Is there, and I saw some numbers in there for how many cents, 40, 50 cents per kilowatt hour. What's the differential between a 150 kilowatt charger and a 7.2 level 2? What do people, is there a market price difference there?
In terms of cost to charge, is that what you're getting at?
In terms of the price to the consumer
fill
to
up.
charge at
Yeah.
those two different facilities?
Yeah, I mean, I can just tell you anecdotally, because I own an electric vehicle, that it can range, and it depends on the charging station that you're at, which company is providing you the power. But I'd say a level 2 charge would be maybe $3 to $5 to charge if you need a full fill up to get 70 miles or so on an EV. And then if you're at a DC fast charger, you'd probably be looking at more like $5 to $10 to $15 for a full fill up for that convenience.
So the difference would be, you're saying 1.5 maybe the
Yeah.
cost, 2,
Yeah.
maybe 2 at the outside max. And so then it comes back, because what we're doing is we're looking to engage partners, much like we engage developers. They have to make some money, otherwise they have to both be able to pay for the installation, which maybe a grant would cover, but it's really the ongoing operation that has to be profitable for them. And so the next question is, EVgo, we have an existing relationship. Do we charge them a ground lease for that today here on the City Hall parking lot?
Yeah, the current contract requires, it's a $20,000 annual fee
good.
that EVgo pays the city.
And then here's the hard question. Do we know if they're making money, and will they be there in 5 and 10 years? I think one of the things I'm looking for in this master plan that would help me is how economically viable are these partnerships, so that as we go down this path, we know that that they're going to pay for themselves, that they won't require a subsidy from the city, and that just like we're talking about with B-Cycle potentially in the future after the pilot program, we'll be able to charge a ground lease so that we're not giving away public funds in any way.
Yeah.
So is there an economic model that you've seen or we could look at?
Not specifically, and that was not included in this scope of work for this plan. We had a very slim budget for this plan, so that level of specificity we didn't go down that route. So no, however, I would say there is a market, because there are charging station companies that are out there that are wanting to put these in. And there, like you said, there are grants out there. I think it's one of those newer technologies that as time goes on and we learn how, it gets more efficient and the cost goes down. So I think it will improve over time, and especially as this becomes much more prevalent. We're kind of at the beginning stages now where it is a little more costly and there isn't that, easy sell per se to a commercial entity. But this is kind of the starting point, and that's where we want to get to.
And then the other thing I want to caution is that, I think on page 50, you talk about the blink chargers over here in Lot B are obsolete or due for an upgrade, I think is the exact quote. How long have they been in? When did those units go in?
They went in probably at least 5 years or more ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they do.
I'm a technology executive. I'm an electrical engineer by training, so I'm all comfortable with this. 5 years from now, in this industry, in the adoption phase it's in right now, is like a millennium. The world will be so different, and I'll tell you, it's going to be the economic viability that drives this, unless we're willing to underwrite the costs. So those are my clarification questions.
I was at the ribbon cutting at that Lot B. It was Jerome Stocks cut the ribbon. So it's been a while.
But it's still not 20 years. It's not 10 years. It's 10 years. has it been 10 years? Still, 10 years in technology is a millennium. We're talking 2030, which is 7 years. And so it's a very, very murky technology. We're in that phase of adoption in technology. This has been my life, my career for 40 years.
Yes.
I know where we are.
And I think most of what I see in this conversation is a scream for government regulation, because when you look at the diagrams of the different plugs alone, it begs for a standard. Each vehicle, pulling into a spot that has a charger that doesn't have a plug-in is pretty frustrating. Deputy Mayor Lyons.
Yes, Crystal, I'm looking for a little bit more clarification, but it plays off of what Councilmember Ehlers was talking about. In the front, right up front of the staff report, it says there's, as far as fiscal considerations, so there are none for the city. So I'm taking that at its face value, and I think that's what you're saying as well. But I'm also seeing a few places in the report where there's some wording which is not entirely clear. So I'd just like your clarification. On page 5, the master plan concludes with a series of recommendations and so forth. It says the city should install or partner with others to install chargers at popular public destinations. Your clarification just seemed to clarify for me that no, we're actually not planning on installing, that we're planning on working with our partners, and especially since we said there were no fiscal impacts. Is that the right understanding of that?
It's close. So I would say that the fiscal impact that was characterized in the staff report is specific to this plan. Oh. So, but looking forward, now that we have the plan, the city could opt to allocate funding to actually install chargers on city facilities. So at that time, we would come to council, include it in our budget, and ask for direction to be able to install those charging stations with those funds.
Okay, I see that, and that makes it make sense. I'm not sure we wanted to, we'll talk about that if it ever comes before
Correct.
us, but
Yeah.
Whether that's the right way to go, I'm not sure. So the other thing I did read, and I'm not quite sure where it is, it might be further on down, that we may need to do some infrastructure improvements to accommodate new charging stations on our public, so that would be a cost to us too.
Yeah, and that would go for probably every site, is that it takes a lot of power, especially for the high-powered charging stations, to charge a car. So most likely the infrastructure is not there from the utility to be able to serve that need, and the lines coming in from the utility would need to be upgraded to be able to provide adequate power.
Then would a next, how do you envision being so knowledgeable about this and already thinking forward once this is approved? Would there be sort of an annual plan for how it rolls out?
That could be done, or you could take it on a project-by-project basis and get very site-specific and identify what the utilities are, what the needs are, and do it that way as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thanks. And on page 5 of the staff report, it has a list. Master plan concludes with a series of recommendations for the city to consider when planning for or promoting the installation of EV charging station as follows. And the word partner is one that makes me a little bit nervous. We have partnered with a private entity to install charging stations at the lower lot, and it was a miserable failure. And so my own preference would be that we do less partnering and more incentivizing. That's true on item 6. The city should encourage employers and commercial property owners. I would like to see us incentivize it somehow, and I'm not sure what that would be, fee waivers, how that would work, but we should take it a step beyond encouragement and actually try and incentivize that in my opinion. I see the map with the dot, with the pins that is pretty balanced, but as a driver of an e-Golf, which had a limited range, I can tell you that range anxiety is real. And, so you're making a run to try and get to your charger at home, but, every 100 feet you may find that you've hit zero. And so the more of these stations that we can get on private property where feasible, the better. So for example, these auto dealers that have wired for these stations, if there was a way to encourage them, incentivize them to put in a publicly available charging station, that would be good. So I'm not sure whether we're needing to make changes to this plan, or or whether that language can be changed, or exactly what you'd be looking for.
Yeah, I mean, you're welcome to make direct changes, or, my staff opinion is that these are general enough that when we do formally as staff.
So we could encourage people by incentivizing. And so
Yeah, I think
future
so.
councils, their encouragement may be different than what this one is. So instead of saying explicitly to incentivize, we would just consider encouragement to be incentivizing.
Yeah, I think that's a form of encouragement. Yeah.
And then can you get into the level of planning involvement, engineering involvement in the installation of these? Are we going to be working from some sort of international code that speaks to the installation of charging stations?
You mean like, is the state building code address it in terms of
Yeah,
standards?
when we're pulling wires, we're going to have 5 chargers, and we know we need X number of amp hours or kilowatts or whatever, and we're going to make sure that that's, and how can we also encourage some redundancy of conduiting, so that if there was a desire to expand, if there were federal incentives to expand, it would be something that could be done fairly easily.
Yeah, that's definitely being thought about at the state level in terms of the state building codes, the electrical codes as it relates to EV charging stations and new construction and remodeling. There's stronger codes there that when you're installing a new building and it triggers an EV charging station requirement, not only are you required to install a certain number of chargers, but you're also required to future-proof and install additional wires, so that when you go to install additional chargers, the wiring is already there. So that is being considered at a higher level besides just locally.
Right. And so the the Inflation Reduction Act was one of the first bills that included significant investments in green technology, and I believe charging stations and building out these facilities was there were resources that were dedicated to that. Has the city done any analysis on how we can facilitate private property owners and the city to obtain as much of that money as possible for this grid?
Yeah, we're constantly watching that, and in fact, one of the first grants made available by that act just dropped last week, and so we're evaluating that opportunity to see if it might be something that the city would.
So we've done some outreach to some of these sites here, and we're engaged with the property owners?
Not to that extent. The grant opportunity just became available, but that once we get this plan if we get the plan adopted tonight, that'll allow an opportunity for us to start doing some of this outreach and seeing if there's a potential to encourage them or partner or whatever the system may be. We'll start doing that as staff.
Okay, and has SDG&E been involved at all in any of these discussions? Are they aware of our plan, and are they prepared to facilitate the installation of these charging stations?
They're aware of the plan. They do have their own EV charging station implementation project. It's called Power Your Drive. And they are they definitely do install charging stations, and we're actually, as a city, a part of that program. Those are the charging stations that we have at Public Works are through that program. So that's an option as well that we could look into to install additional
Well, I'm
stations.
concerned that for, the history of projects around town, sometimes or maybe oftentimes there are delays that are encountered because of either permitting through SDG&E or they are required to, pull wires or underground wires or whatever. So I hope we can establish the dialogue fairly quickly and figure out whether that's going to be an impediment, whether that's going to create hurdles for us. So overall, I am really pleased that we're this far along, and I made my comments about that section and am convinced that the language works for a council to, fill in some of the details about what it means to encourage and what it means to partner. So I'm okay. So Councilmember Ehlers.
Yeah, just a few more questions. We've approved how many? We're in the process of either approving or already approved 10 or 11 now of these R30s. I think I asked this question of staff earlier. Did they make it under the wire, or do they actually have to put in 15% chargers?
They are all required to put in 15% chargers.
Every one of them?
Every one
Awesome.
of them, yeah.
Awesome. So then my next question is, we're looking at adoption rates and we're looking at how we've run up the curve. Did the surveying give you any indication of renters versus homeowners of the current adoption? I think you made a comment somewhere in the report that it was probably today mostly homeowners, but are there numbers associated with that?
Not specifically directly related to the ownership. However, we are able to gauge that based on the land use and the types of buildings that we have in the community. So that was factored into the analysis.
Oh, but we don't know. So here's the scenario that I keep thinking about. It's the homeowners, the 65% or whatever it is in the city of Encinitas. It's all within their control. When they make their investment in a electric car. If they want to make the further investment in a level 2, they can do it, and they can do the electrician rewiring, whatever they have to do, and they'll charge overnight when the rates are the lowest. Great. So now I want to look at, and be equitable, I want to look at what renters do, and if a renter is in not one of the new ones that has plenty of chargers for those people that own electric cars in the building, but to some of the legacy, which is the vast majority of our rental housing stock, is what happens, where do they charge? And so to me, it comes back to the dwell time for the charge. And so if I look at the charge time on a level 2 at 7 kilowatts versus a Tesla new generation urban one at 72 kilowatts, 10 times faster, to get a 100-mile charge is going to take on the level 2, which is the majority of these public chargers we're going to be talking about, it's going to take 8 hours. I mean, it's got to sit there. So the logical time to do that is at night. And again, I'm going to go back to the cost and the billing rate. The preference would be to do it at night when the billing rate is slightly lower. I think you showed us some examples in here. And so I'm scratching my head going, we're gonna go build all these probably level 2 with some fast chargers, and quite frankly, the fast chargers are only 50 kilowatts typically, not the super fast ones. I think the EVgo, those are 50 kilowatt, right? They're not the 150 or 350?
The ones in the lower lot?
Yeah.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. Are there any of the 150 to 350 kilowatt chargers in town yet?
I'm not positive offhand. We didn't get to that level of we did look at it, but it wasn't tabled in the report.
And my recollection, I think I was on the Planning Commission when we approved the first rendition for the what preceded the EVgo. And my recollection is that the architecture the previous applicant was talking about was to have battery banks there. And what they do is they slowly charge the battery bank at the lower wattage. so that they don't have, so SDG&E doesn't have to run huge cables in, and that when a car comes in, they can download all that extra charge very quickly through a high wattage. So it reduces the demand on the infrastructure, outside of the place. So but it costs money too, and so I just want to make sure they're economically viable. We're not seeing those yet. So I would prefer to have a little more analysis on the economic viability in this, because I think that's what's going to drive this, that this is not going to be a government-funded, city-funded rollout. We're trying to put a framework in, and we want to understand how do we incentivize, how do we encourage investors, basically investors in these things. I want to talk a little bit about permitting, and I think there was AB 1236, is that what it was? Aren't electric car charging stations already mandatorily expedited down to like 5 days or some? Roy, can you, I don't know, or Crystal, could you speak to that? I see Roy nodding his head.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
we've implemented that code so that those quick turnaround requirements are being implemented.
Yeah. Quick is the understatement. I mean, those are incredibly fast. So, but the bottom line is there it has already been at the state level incentivizing or expediting of those permits. So which is great. So dwell times. Yeah, and like I say, dwell times. There was one last comment. Any consideration? I saw parks, I saw a beach, I saw shopping. The one that came to mind for me were gas stations. This if it's economically viable to have parking spaces turned into revenue generators, it just seems like an absolute natural that gas stations would take this on and go through that effort. They're nicely distributed throughout town. Even 7-Eleven in the middle of Village Park has a huge parking space, and wouldn't that be a nice place where literally people could walk home and let their car sit and charge? A renter could walk to their apartment across the street, literally from 7-Eleven, as an example, and could leave their car there charging for 8 hours while they're at home. And it all works. So I'd like to see an addition in here just talking about how do we get gas stations to convert over? Because, hey, let's hope in 30, 40 years that they're all electric and there is, they have one pump left. So as they convert pumps to something else, we get them converted to charging stations, charging parking spaces. So those are my comments.
Okay, very good. And I would encourage anybody that buys an electric car to buy a charging station for their garage, because even as convenient as 7-Eleven might be for some property owners out in Village Park, there's nothing that beats pulling into your yard and plugging in. So with, I would make a motion to approve the electric vehicle charging station master plan. Deputy Mayor Lyons.
I'll second that. I was going to make the motion, but since you have, I will second it. And I think there's been a lot of really good discussion. I especially appreciate our expert electrical engineer and his insights. I know that you will keep these comments in consideration and as we move forward to implement this kind of overarching plan.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, fantastic. Let's see, that means that we're moving on to council member reports pursuant to AB 1234.
None tonight.
Deputy Mayor Lyons and I had an Encina Wastewater Authority board meeting today where we reviewed the increase in the legal billing rate and approved some capital improvements for roofing enhancements.
Was there any word on what the sewage spill in Bataquitos Lagoon was?
No, it was not Encina.
We know that.
There was no finger pointing.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
done
I
at
will,
that
I will
meeting?
let whatever authority did it speak for themselves.
I see, okay.
Yeah. But there was no talk of it there either.
There was no talk?
And the operational report for the last month cited no spills, so I know
Good.
that.
Good. And, you know, it's probably bad luck to talk about some other agency's spills, so.
Exactly. That's a good point.
Yeah, people in glass toilets or something like that.
I would just like to report that tonight we approved the MOU between the City of Encinitas and NCTD to be able to pursue design of our supplemental safety measures to quiet some crossings in downtown Encinitas. We still would love to have Carlsbad's participation to quiet their Cannon crossing, which will mean quiet crossings for Leucadia Boulevard and future at-grade crossings. And so I'll ask my colleagues to help leverage some what do you call it, Tony? Politicking, some politicking there, yeah. Thank you.
I know a lot of words that could have fit there, but I wasn't sure which one you were looking for.
I have two things to report. Supervisor Lawson-Remer has asked me to join and to chair the Sandag Sustainable Communities Working Group, and I've accepted that position. So I look forward to engaging with them in a month or so with the first meeting. And there has been a question about, so I have a meeting tomorrow as a board member on the board of the San Diego County Water Authority, and there has been a question about water rates increase. There was a public statement made by the Water Authority about 2 weeks ago, which started people asking questions, and there is some preliminary information on rate increases, but it's going to be a topic at our meeting tomorrow, and rate increases are going to be a topic between now and June, with final recommendations made in June to mid to late June. So I just want to say that we have some preliminary information earlier than we usually do from the Water Authority. Being that it's earlier than they usually announce, they may be somewhat conservative, making some conservative assumptions. However, this will be vetted through the next couple months. Just thought I'd clarify that piece of information.
Okay, thank you. And I had the opportunity to attend a conference in Asilomar in Monterey County. It was a conference by CivicWell. My colleagues Joy and Kelly were there as well. It was a great opportunity to talk about issues related to sustainable energy, affordable housing. There were conversations, quite a few. Enjoyed the opportunity to hear from experts and other jurisdictions about the challenges that they're having. And it was also a wonderful opportunity to see the coast in Monterey County. I have not spent much time on that coast, and it is much different than our coast. So it was interesting to see that. And I look forward to the next one because I think as a group, CivicWell has done a very good job of finding speakers that bring issues of importance to be discussed, and especially true for a city like ours. So I enjoyed that. City manager reports. City attorney reports?
Nothing this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. City clerk reports. Okay, with that, thank you all. We're adjourned.
safety goes. Thank you for watching, and be sure to check out our other safety videos.
The following fire safety video is brought to you by the Encinitas, Solana Beach, and Del Mar Fire Departments. This video will provide you with safety guidelines and recommendations on subjects to assist in keeping you, your family, and your home fire safe. Thank you for watching.
Hi, I'm Jordan Villagomez with the Encinitas Fire Department.
And I'm Zachary Basin, Solana Beach Fire Department.
Today we'll be talking about how to maintain